Okay, this is the 8th grade Fair Game Review. The objective, students will review input and output patterns. The standard covered is 8EE6. The page numbers out of the hardcover book are page 147, and out of the practice journal, pages 75 through 76. So you'll be using your practice journal today. So I'm just gonna do a brief review of input and output tables, also known as X and Y patterns. Okay, so your input is also known as your X. Your output is also known as your Y. So you're going to be looking at some different types of input-output tables. This would be like a diagram. Okay, so this is a diagram of an input-output function. So as the input, just noticing they're going to ask you to kind of describe your input-output diagrams or tables. If we take a look at our input, what is happening between each of these numbers? So as we go from 2 to 4, it looks like we're increasing by 2, adding 2. So does that happen with our next one? Well, from 4 to 6, it looks like we're adding 2. And from 6 to 8, it looks like we're adding 2. So as the input increases by 2, what is happening to our output? So now we're going to do the same concept. We're going to compare our output. So from 0 to 3, it looks like it's going up by 3, so adding 3 or increasing by 3. 3 to 6 is increasing by 3, and 6 to 9 is increasing by 3. So when you have a function, you're going to notice that there's a pattern between each of those. So as the input increased by 3, the output also increased, but this was instead of 2, sorry, it increased by 2, it also increased by 3. Okay, so that's just describing our input-output pattern. Oops. Okay, so let's take a look at this one. This is just another way in which they can show input-output. So instead of it being vertical, we have a horizontal table showing us input-output. So these are all of our inputs. So we're going to kind of take a peek and see what's happening between each of these. So as the X, or the input, it looks to me like it's decreasing or it's going down. So to get from 6 to 1, maybe subtracting 5. So then we're going to check, does that pattern match for the next step? To get from 1 to negative 4, yes, we're subtracting 5. So on each of these, we're subtracting 5. So as the X decreases by 5, the Y then does what? So what's happening to the Y's? Well, we go from 7 to 8, so that's adding 1. 8 to 9 is adding 1. So we can see that it's adding 1 every time. So then the Y increases by 1. Okay, so once again, just comparing our inputs to input and output to output. Okay, then sometimes they will also give you where you have a graph, and they give you a diagram, and they ask you to go through and actually fill in the diagram. Okay, so it'll say draw a mapping diagram is I think the wording that they actually call it. So we're going to go ahead and do our coordinates. So remember, when you do coordinates, it's always X and then Y. So X comma Y when you do a set of coordinates. You'll notice X is my input and Y is my output. Okay. So when you read coordinates, remember it's always over then up. So when I read this coordinate, I went over to 1, up to 1. So this would be input was 1, output was 1, 1 comma 1. Okay, our next one, so we'll do this blue dot. I went over to 2 and up to 3, so that would be 2 comma 3. So my input was a 2, my output was a 3. So notice, see, this is exactly the same as that line there. Okay, my third one we'll do is our black one. We've got over to 3 up to 5, so 3 comma 5. And then the last one we'll do in yellow, over to 4 up to 7, so 4 comma 7. Okay, so now we're also going to describe, because it'll ask us to fill that in, and then it's also going to ask us to describe the pattern of the inputs and the outputs. So what's happening in our inputs? Well, as the input went up by 1, it looks like, what's happening to our output? It's also going up by 1. Or not 1, sorry, 2. So both of them are increasing. Okay, so that's just working with some input output. Eventually what we'll be doing is figuring out what the equations are that they use to actually write these out. And some of you might be able to do that now just by graphing it out. You could write out that y-intercept equation, that we did back in our previous chapters. We could go through and write out that y-intercept equation. So for this one, if we were to take it to that next level, we could write out the y-intercept equation if I were to continue this pattern going down 1 over 2. So down 2 over 1, down 2 over 1. It's going to cross right there because I didn't use a straight line. So my y-intercept equation would be y equals, my slope is rise of 2 over 1, so 2x. And then it crossed at, and this is -1, even though we can't see that on the line. That would be the equation that we could substitute in to solve more of our inputs and outputs. We could pick x's and then solve for y. Okay, eventually that's what you will be working with in this chapter. So that's pretty much it for the fair game review. You'll just be working with understanding inputs and outputs, that your inputs are your x's and your outputs are your y's.